think we can get started. It's 12:30. What do you think?
Yes, sure. Go
Okay.
right ahead, Yuli.
All right. Hello everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Basics Accessible Form Validation That Works. So I'm Yuli, a UX UI accessibility designer from Last Call Media, and I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today. Joining me is Alexandra. She's been the one calling out all the locations who will be sharing the development perspective. Alexandra, do you want to give a little description of yourself?
Yes, thank you, Yuli. My name is Alexandra DeVoe. I'm an accessibility engineer at the Massachusetts Accessibility Center for Consulting, Education, and Support Services, also known as the Access Team. My role at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts includes guiding and training developers and test engineers with the journey of building accessible digital products and services. And I'm an expert in form development. Back to you, Yuli.
Thanks. So before we actually dive in, we have just a few quick housekeeping items. And one thing is this session is being recorded and will be available to you afterwards. No need to take notes. We will share our resources and examples at the end of the session as well. Please use the Q&A feature for questions, and we'll address them at the end. Please note, everything that we're going to be discussing in this session is based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG version 2.1, level A and level AA. So there are actually 50 success criteria, which is so many. And we only listed out the ones that apply to today's examples in our resource slide. So I think now we can get to what you guys came here for. So before I do that, let me just go to cinema so you don't have to see my face. Okay, so universal need for accessible forms. Forms are the gateways to our digital world. Job applications, healthcare portals, tax filings, and even registering for this conference, they're everywhere. Yet, when forms fail accessibility, they don't just create frustrations, they create barriers that can lock people out of essential services. Today, we're focusing on one crucial piece of this puzzle: form validation and error handling. We'll explore why error states can make or break the user experience, share practical design principles, and give you techniques you can implement immediately. Before we get started, let's do a quick overview on how disability impacts all of us. So, different disabilities affect the way a person processes information. A visual layout that isn't intuitive can be difficult for any user, but may completely prevent a user from a cognitive disability from getting what they need. A video without captions isn't helpful to someone with hearing impairments. And interaction that requires a drag and drop can be totally unusable for someone who can't use a mouse or touchscreen. All functionality you design and build needs to be available to all users, including those who navigate a website, application, or document using only the keyboard. According to the US government, more than 1 in 4, or 28.7% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. So really, this also means that over a quarter of the people accessing your content have some type of disability. Making your digital content accessible increases usability and everyone benefits. Types of disabilities. There are 4 main categories of disabilities we should consider when building accessible content. They are visual, hearing, mobility, and cognitive. At some point in our lives, we either have or will all experience a disability, whether it's situational, temporary, or permanent. So ensuring digital accessibility helps us all. Disability exists on a spectrum, and affects all of us at different times. Consider these scenarios. A right-handed person with their right hand broken trying to use a mouse with their left hand. People with a hand tremor using a mouse. An elderly person with cataracts. They can have them surgically removed, but until then, everything is cloudy. A person experiencing temporary vision issues before or after eye surgery. When we design for accessibility for government, we're designing for all constituents. We're acknowledging that people interact with technology in different ways, and our job is to make each interaction successful. We're going to do a quick poll. What's your job role and what's your experience with digital accessibility? So feel free to fill that out. So why error states are a make or break moments? Error handling is one of the most critical form functions. If implemented correctly and accessible, all constituents will be able to complete the task without help. Let's look at an example. You're filling out an important form, you submit it, and you get back something went wrong. Frustrating, right? Now imagine experiencing that same vague error message while using a screen reader that doesn't even announce what went wrong, or worse, which field had an error. So, what can designers do? Well, let's take a look at visual design best practices. Let's talk about making errors visible and understandable through design. Form labels must be descriptive and visible. Font size should be no smaller than 16 pixels. This allows for optimal readability. We serve the elderly, and they often wear reading glasses. Text against its background must meet at least the 4.5:1 contrast requirement. This can be checked by using various contrast plugins or sites. Default border contrast must also be 3:1 requirement. Focus outline contrast must be 3:1 requirement. Fun fact: 1 in 8 men of European descent is colorblind. Color contrast is important. Don't rely on color alone to convey meaning. Combine color with icons, symbols, or other text indicators. A red border means nothing to someone who can't distinguish colors. But a red border plus an error icon plus clear messaging works for everyone. Form instructions, labels, and error messages. So here's the secret to great error handling: preventing errors in the first place. Error states start with good form design. Provide detailed form instructions at the top of the page. If it's multiple pages, make sure to include the detailed form instructions on every page where applicable. Add headings to group form items like fields of a mailing address. Use descriptive labels for every input. Include helper text to show formatting requirements. Show error messages below each corresponding input for better association. Write error messages that clearly explain how to fix the issue. The difference between invalid password and password must be at least 8 characters with 1 number and 1 special character is the difference between frustration and success. Now we're going to talk about layout, styles, and responsiveness. Form and error messages need to work for different devices, settings, and user preferences. Errors must not be cut off or truncated when viewed using browser zoom or large text. Your application must support up to 400% browser zoom, and up to 200% text resize. As a designer, don't specify hard-coded width or height for developers, as it may prevent browser zoom or text resize. Instead, use minimum width and minimum height. Don't require developers to use custom styles for radial buttons and checkboxes to make them consistent across all browsers. Instead, let developers use native radial and checkbox styles as defined by the browser. This will ensure that the element will still remain usable when using high contrast themes or dark mode. Remember, your form may look perfect on your design screen, but it needs to also be built in a robust way and work on all devices, screen sizes, and browsers for all users. Title II of the American Disability Act, also known as ADA. Accessibility isn't just good practice. It's the law and, honestly, a fundamental right. The Title II of the ADA applies to all services, programs, and activities provided by state and local governments, including services offered online and through mobile apps. Starting on April 24th, 2026, the new Title II law goes in effect, stating that all digital content and digital services must comply with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.1, Level A and Level AA. Everyone deserves equal access to digital services. When we create accessible forms, we're not just following the rules, we're ensuring that a veteran applying for benefits, a student registering for classes, or a parent signing up their child for school programs all can complete these tasks with independence and confidence. So we have a bunch of resources and next steps. So ready to put this into practice, we've prepared resources to help you get started. Alexandra has created a fully accessible live CodePen example form you can explore and use as a starting point. This form also includes more than just form error handling. We've also included free resources and implementation guides created by the Massachusetts Access team. Last but not least, check out the applicable WCAG guidelines to view the accessibility standards and techniques we implemented. Now let's see these principles in action. Alexandra, take it away for our development demonstration.
Thank you so much, Yuli. This was amazing. Again, for anybody who's joined us a little later, please post any questions under the Q&A section. I am sharing a download presentation button on the screen. Put in the chat if you can see this giant button. This will allow you to download the PowerPoint that Yuli created. And on the second to the last slide, we have all the resource links for you gathered. We're going to share them in chat later as well, but I want to make sure you all take 5 seconds, click the download button, and grab it. I'm keeping this button alive for, I think, 10 minutes, but just in case. Just wanted to call that out, and I'm going to start sharing my screen, Yuli. Let me just move this to the other screen before I do that. I have 2 screens I'm working with here. Yuli, you were too smooth. It's hard thing to follow you. All right, here we go. I created this form for everybody. And this form is also available in a CodePen example where I have the CSS and the JavaScript separate. It includes inline form validation, and we're going to walk through some of those best practices. I also have in the resource document our mass.gov page that I created that actually covers double what we're able to show in this small time space. So I highly recommend you check out the mass.gov page that I created that goes with this form training. So that way you can later on learn more details about how to build accessible forms from beginning to end. Here in this meeting, we're only concentrating on validation because we had a 45-minute time slot. All right, so let's go talk about accessible forms. When deciding on an overall form structure and components, Yuli already mentioned radio buttons and checkboxes. Always use native HTML elements. Avoid custom components, especially date pickers. They're very difficult to be made accessible. For radio and checkbox button groups, I recommend that you use the field set and the legend tag. And I'm going to use the developer tool to inspect the Google Chrome developer tool so you can see how the structure will be built. You have a field set tag, and then you have a label that's wrapped inside the legend tag. This label basically is usually a question format when it's a radio button or checkbox group. In this case, the legend says, what time would you like a callback? Then the options, in this case is the checkbox morning, afternoon, and evening options, will be wrapped in LI tags. LI and UL tags are considered unordered lists. And this is very helpful for a screen reader user. If they navigate this element, it will announce to them 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, because there's 3 checkboxes. The other piece inside the LI, we have a label tag that's wrapping the input, the checkbox input. And again, I'm not using any CSS overrides. As you can see on the right-hand side, I'm allowing the native styles of the browser to be defined. That way I don't have to worry about high contrast themes and it not showing up if it's checked. What I've seen when I did site audits where they use CSS overlays, when a user checks the radio button or the checkbox, sometimes it's not visible if it's selected, and then the form becomes completely unusable. And this is for sighted users. We also know based on statistics that 70% of all users, let's say on mass.gov, we have maybe 80% or so users on mobile devices. And out of those 80% of mobile device users, 70% use a high contrast theme. So this is really the majority of users that might not be able to see a selected state of a radio button or a checkbox, making the form unusable. So again, default to the native input styles and don't override them. This is important for designers and developers. Also, you can see I've nested the input inside the label tag. This is not necessarily a requirement because we're using the for attribute to point to the ID of the input, which makes it accessible for screen reader users. And in here, it's pointing to the ID with the value of morning. However, by nesting it inside, it allows me to click the text and not just the checkbox to select the option. And on older browsers or on some devices, and again, we have to support all devices. Not all users use a laptop or a desktop. Not all users use a common browser. It needs to work on everything. So to build it the most robust way, you can wrap the input inside the label tag, giving them a larger target for clicking or touchscreen devices. Just wanted to call that out. For helper text, Yuli already touched base on that. I have my helper text in this example as part of the form label. Of course, you can have it separate on its own line. If you put it separate, you would need to use aria describe by on the actual input field to point to the ID of the helper text. Helper text should be used for formatting instructions. If you have global helper text, you want to put that at the top of the page. Here we have a couple of sentences. Fields marked with a red asterisk are required. This is a very common practice. If you use a red asterisk to mark a visual indicator that you feel is required, make sure you have this on every screen of every form page if you have a multi-page form. Otherwise, this will not be passing instructions requirements for WCAG because the red asterisk by itself might not be meaningful for all users. Not everybody understands what this means. So we have to always think about users who are not as experienced, who might not understand this. For Placeholder text. Everybody knows what placeholder text is, I hope. Placeholder is an attribute that can be used on an input, and I'm going to just add this here dynamically. And you all have seen this, of course. I'm just going to put in email@gmail.com. This will become my placeholder text. I've seen placeholder text in search boxes where they say use keywords to search or other instructions, right? The problem with placeholder text and why I recommend you don't use it is once you start typing, it disappears, right? And once it disappears, a user who might have memory issues or cognitive issues might not remember what it just said, right? And also placeholder text doesn't always get announced by all screen readers. It is not supposed to be used for anything really, even though it exists, right? So avoid placeholder text. There's also another attribute I want to talk about that's important for forms, which is called the autocomplete attribute. There's actually a success criterion just for that, and it's called, Yuli might be able to remember. I have to always look it up. It doesn't even say autocomplete. I'm just going to go to my list here. Let's see, identify input purpose, right? We would never associate the success criterion with the word autocomplete, but when you click on this and go all the way to the bottom of the Wiki guidelines, it basically says sufficient technique using HTML autocomplete attributes, right? But the name of it, the name of the success criterion doesn't even use the word autocomplete. It says identify input purpose. And this allows users to quickly fill out forms without having to retype everything. Autocomplete attributes are supposed to be used for elements that are common. There's a whole list. Again, I provided that in the CodePen example on the very bottom. Again, the CodePen is listed in the PowerPoint, second of the last slide. And on the very bottom of the CodePen, there's all the resources that I'm using, to teach this particular example. And so autocomplete exists for all these elements. Autocomplete does not have to be used on something like a password, for example, or a message field, because you want the user to fill out whatever they want to fill out. But it should be used for the first name, last name, address, etc., things like that. How we're doing for time? I think we're doing okay. For required fields, we already talked about the visual indicator using the red asterisk. We also could use the ARIA required equals true. There are other techniques. I use ARIA required equals true. On this example, there's also the HTML5 required attribute. However, with that attribute, you get different styling that's harder to overwrite and actually creates like a little pop-up for it. With ARIA required true, the browser doesn't generate its own styles for the error message, which allows you to just use your own custom styles. I already mentioned the field set and the legend tag. In this example, I also used the field set and legend tag to group multiple form fields. In this case, I used it for the US mailing address. Let me just expand so I can show that. Field set wraps all the form elements. The legend is just replacing the heading. In this case, it's using the legend tag. And this will allow a screen reader user to have the US mailing address heading announced. If you use an H tag here, it will not announce it unless you use programmatic ARIA described by or labeled by on the first field. But using the legend tag, if a screen reader user taps into the first field of the group, it will announce US mailing address, street address 1. And this is very helpful. And it actually also uses the word grouping, at least on NVDA. It might use a different term on other screen readers, but this is very helpful for a screen reader user to understand this is a grouping I'm entering, especially with this one here, date of birth. I did the same thing. So I used a grouping and then birth month, 2-digit birthday, and 4-digit birth year. And again, I'm going to just show you here the field set that wraps the whole group, and the legend tag that basically serves as a heading visually, but for a screen reader user, it associates it with the fields that are inside the field set group. Now let's look at some form error messages. I'm going to close this for a second, the developer tool. First rule of thumb is, when should I show error messages? The best practice is to show error messages on submit button activation only, not on blur, like we've seen in some forms where I tab through a form, and if I don't fill it out, I see an error message as I tab through the form. This is not a good user experience, especially for screen reader users, because it might announce the error before, as they tab to the next field, and it can be very confusing if it's not programmatically associated. So a best practice is to tab through the entire form, or allow a screen reader user to tab through the entire form to get familiar with what are the fields they need to fill out without any errors. And then at the very end, if they hit submit without filling it out, then you get all your error messages. So on submit, show your error messages. In this example, we're using inline error messages, which is very helpful for all users because it is right underneath the field that has an error. The technique I'm using is ARIA described by, and ARIA described by points to the ID of the container that lists the error message. And in this case, the ID it uses is first name error. Inside the error message container, I use an SVG error icon, which also has an ARIA label called error to announce that it's an error, and a span tag saying, please enter a first name. Very important that your error messages are descriptive and include the field label. So the field label is first name. So in your error message, you want to repeat this. Reason being is because if you just say, this field can't be empty, it's very vague, and you want to be very descriptive in your error. Another way, another form of error that we can also show is here, where I left the email partially empty. I didn't fill out a proper email address. And here I added also the ARIA invalid equals true attribute in its value. This is only supposed to be used when you have an invalid entry or a formatting issue, right? So having the ARIA invalid equals true on this field, when a screen reader user tabs through this field, it will actually announce contact info, which is the legend, email, which is the field label. It will also announce that it's required because I have ARIA required true. And it will also announce invalid, which is based on ARIA invalid true. And then it will read the error message. Email is missing the @ symbol and a period or dot. And it will also announce the icon's word error before it announces the error message, so that a screen reader user understands there is an error, just another word. Screen reader users have their screen reader on really high speed, so they will hear stuff really, really fast. Let's see what else I want to cover before we open it for questions and answers. After the user fixes the error, we make the error message go away on blur. So I use an on blur JavaScript event. And this is super helpful because a screen reader only user will tab through the form after they fill out all the fields and proofread it like anybody else. So if they still had that error message there visible after they fixed the issue, they would be confused and they would say, oh, did I fix my error? Why do I still hear an error announced? So after you tab through each field filling it out, you should no longer hear an error message. And as Yuli already mentioned, we have design best practices. In particular, you want to meet the color contrast for the border, right? So in our case, we use 949494 as the color for the borders, which is the lightest gray you can use to meet the 3:1 aspect ratio. And as you can see on the screen, it's pretty dark. If I had CCC, which is a common color for borders, it would fail. It would not meet the 3:1. The other thing I want to demonstrate is the focus outline. I use a technique that uses box shadow. Again, all these things are detailed and documented on the mass.gov page. The code snippets are in the code pen with the CSS. This box shadow creates a white outline around the field, allowing it to be visible against dark background and light background. And then I'm using the box shadow itself is blue. And I can actually show you the CSS by going into the field and going to force state and focus. And it will show us the CSS for it. Here it is. Outline is 2 pixels, F9, 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 solid color. This is a off-white. Then the outline offset is 0. And the box shadow is the blue color. So this technique was actually recommended by the developers and content writers of the Wiki guidelines. That's why we're using it here. Last but not least, we talked about the high contrast on checkboxes. Now let's talk real briefly on testing your form. When testing your form, a couple of tests I would want everybody to run is browser zoom is one of them. So use Control Plus on your browser and you can increase your form to 400%. 400% is actually an equivalent of a 320 pixel screen, which is the old iPhone 5. And everything on your form should be visible. Nothing is truncated or cut off. As Yuli mentioned, don't use hard-coded widths or heights. You can use min width and min height, but don't use hard-coded width or height or hard-coded max width or max height. Those can clip your content. And another thing, as you can see, I have it laid out on desktop where we have 3 rows together, and when I zoom in, it becomes single stacked. This is just the best practice. You can also use the developer tool, the Google Chrome or the Firefox, or even Edge has a developer tool where you can emulate into a different device mode, which I'm going to just show a quick way of how do you change that. You can pretend to be a Galaxy S8, and there's a bunch of devices you can choose from. You can click on edit and add additional devices. You can also use the button on the top to rotate portrait versus landscape. And the default on the top is responsive, which allows you to drag and drop or even type in a width of a screen to really see how your form would behave. And you don't have to own all these devices to test that. So this is very important. Browser zoom, I see a lot of testers skipping that. Visible focus outline, we already talked about. Everything has to have a visible focus outline to pass WCAG success criteria. And the other thing I wanted to mention is there's also text resize and text spacing. Text spacing, there's a little favicon, which is called a bookmark that you can use. You can click it and it will spread out your text. Again, what we're looking for is that nothing is truncated or clipped. As you can see, the selected state box became longer, and that's because I increased the spacing between each letter. And when I highlight it, the word is not truncated because I use min width instead of a width or max width. So it allows to grow with the form. It will not constrict it. Very important. The other thing you want to test is text resize. I would go to settings in Google Chrome. Then I change the appearance. Under appearance, I go to font size, very large. I got to make it very large, which is double. Then I go back to my form, and now the font itself has increased to be twice the size. I didn't use browser zoom. I believe I'm at 100%. Yep. And so the form has increased. And again, because I didn't restrict my width, some fields might grow, and that's okay. Even though some designers might say, I don't like it, it doesn't matter. As long as it's accessible and nothing gets clipped or truncated, even if stuff wraps over 2 lines, that's okay. As long as it doesn't get clipped or truncated, you pass that success criterion. I'm going to change it back to the default, which is medium. The last thing I wanted to share, and I know we only have like 10 minutes left for Q&A. There's a lot more on our page on mass.gov where I really cover everything, including the success message that's built in here and the technique I used. But I think this will conclude my demo. And let's see if we have questions. If we don't have a lot of questions, then, oh, we do have questions. Excellent. Let me start and review. And the first one is, where did you go to be able to test the different devices? Okay, great question. I'm just going to share that. Thank you, Yuli, or somebody who. Somebody beat me to it. All right. So I went to, this is Google Chrome, right? I went to the more tools and then developer tools. You can also use the shortcut on a PC, Control Shift plus I. On a Mac, it's a different shortcut. And that will then open the developer tools. The three buttons on the top right allow you to align it to the right, to the bottom, or detach it, or left aligned. I can even put it on the bottom here, right? I'm going to turn off this tool here, this button here, the toggle device toolbar, so you can see the desktop version. So this is where I went. And there's the console which shows JavaScript errors. That's the default. Then I use this arrow tool here, and I can inspect elements, and it jumps to the elements screen. On the left, I see HTML. On the right, I see CSS. But yeah, there's definitely free training by Google how to learn how to use the developer tool. And this is something developers are very familiar with. They know how to debug their code using that tool. Let's go to another question. Okay, it's jumping. Oh, I have to start from the bottom down. That's why. Is it true that required form fields, let me just publish it. Hold on, how do you do this? Approve, right? Here we go. Now everybody can see the question. I see a lot of municipalities using accessibility overlays and widgets. Could you explain why these actually are a problem? Okay, widgets and overlays actually can cause you to become a target to law firms and get sued because they are not accessible. They claim to be accessible, but we found through testing with screen readers and other tools that they actually make it harder for those users. And so the idea of using any tools cannot change your HTML code, right? So tools can only create something on the surface level. And because they're considered overlays, they are not accessible to all users. So don't use them. You have to fix your code itself. And law firms will look for users, and there have been lawsuits in the past. And that's why we recommend not to use them. We don't use them at the state of Massachusetts. Let's go to this first question. This session specific to online forms, right? So you work with PDF forms. This training is for HTML forms only. So unfortunately, we don't have anything on PDF forms. My recommendation for PDF forms is convert them to a page, use HTML instead of PDF forms. PDF forms are very difficult to be made accessible. And I know in some scenarios you need them. But it's very difficult and very expensive to have it remediated. That's just my opinion, but let's see another question here. Let's go here to this one. For error handling, I've seen some resources recommend including an alert at the top of the form listing the errors as well as having inline errors under each field. I think the idea is that folks may not see some inline errors in longer forms. Is there any guidance around this? Okay, great question. So I didn't show this in my form page, but when I actually submit an empty form, the focus goes to the first field in error. So that's another rule, and I'm sorry if I didn't even announce it. The focus should always go to the first field that has an error. So if I fix these two fields, right, my first and last name, tab back to the bottom of the page and hit submit again, the focus will go to street address 1, which is the next field that has an error. So that's why the focus always goes to that field, so you will never miss which field is an error. And then as you navigate the form down, you will see them. Having it on the top and the bottom is an overkill. And also, you don't want to have an alert for the screen reader user to announce the global error messages and then to do the inline as well. Stick to the inline form experience, which is the safest way for all users. I hope that helps. I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Yes, let's go to the next one. Okay, let me publish this question. I've seen some resources recommend including a broader error message on the top of the form with the inline error messages. I think the idea is that sighted folks may miss below the fold. Okay, again, the focus should jump to the first field in error. And when the focus jumps into the first field in error, the screen will scroll to that field, right? That be on a browser, on a mobile device or desktop. It will always put that make that field visible. As long as you don't have any sticky headers or sticky footers overlapping any of your form fields, you're good to go. Let's see. I think Gianna Clark is next. How do you, which one is this? Hold on. How do you balance the needs of WCAG and an accessible interface with that cognitive overload, which at times is caused by things not looking consistent? Thinking back to the widths that you mentioned. Okay, the widths that I mentioned are for users who use text resize, right? Or to use text spacing for those users only. That's when it will change your width. You can design it to look perfect for 99% of all your other users. So there wouldn't be a cognitive overload if you just can't prevent a user from using those tools and clipping the content, right? So I don't think it will affect them that much because they can just read one row at a time, one field at a time. You can also stack all your fields. You don't have to have them in rows 3 across. You can make your form all stacked, which will reduce cognitive overload. I just wanted to show in this example how the reflow behaves. That's why I made them 3 across. Let's see. Let's see which ones we haven't talked about yet. Gianna Clark, have you tested one thing per page concepts where there are fewer questions on the page but more pages in a form? I'm curious if that impacts the user experience of handling errors in forms. So yes, this is a demo, and for this demo I put a lot of stuff in one page, right? What we've seen is each grouping could be its own page, and that's considered a multi-page form. And I also have on our mass.gov guide page the best practices how to make those multi-page forms accessible. But yes, what you want to do is make the form short and multi-page, like multiple steps, we call them, right? So 100% agree. This is just for the demo purposes that I jammed so much stuff into one screen. All right, what else do we have? This one, yep. How well do design systems like USWDS help us create accessible forms? How much is left for us to implement ourselves? So you can use design systems. I've seen a lot of design systems that give great tips and are very accessible. I found that none of them that are out there are perfect, right? So my recommendation is do your own testing. Make sure that you understand all the success criteria. We listed all the important ones in our second to last slide on the PowerPoint that are form related. And make sure you test, resize it, and it comes down to testing. We have a couple minutes left. We have a couple more questions, right? I know somebody's sharing them. Do we have any more left? Richard Davis. Let's see. What do you recommend for a very large multi-select list? The browser defaults multi-select is clunky with needing to hold down different keys based on your OS and no filtering searching, but custom JavaScript multi-selects usually have accessibility issues. I have built a custom select where you can start typing and it gives you options, right? That's what you're talking about. An input where you start typing and it gives you options and it narrows the options based on you typing letters. So there are techniques to make those accessible. I didn't cover them in this particular training. I do, however, have a code pen that I created in the past. It's listed also on our code pen. Let me see if I can just share that library real quick before it's too late. And I know I have a helper. We have actually collections here. Let me just share this collection in the chat. And this has a bunch of code pens that you're welcome to look at that I tested for the state of Massachusetts. So grab that link. I just posted it in the chat. And that's how I build my stuff. I build little snippets, I test them, I make sure they're fully accessible before I even make recommendations to our design system team. Did I answer all the questions or did I miss some? I would like to know.
There are a couple more.
Can you
Yeah, I'll
them?
highlight. Yeah, for sure.
I want to go and get through them at
There you
least.
go.
All right, Richard. What do you recommend for a very large multi-select list? We already covered that. We just did that, right? What is your opinion about pop-up modals for sections for forms? Think about error handling with this as well. So there's a JavaScript alert message that's built into JavaScript, 100% accessible. It's called alert is the function in JavaScript. Each browser makes it look slightly different. This format is 100% accessible. You can use it. It's not inline, it's a pop-up, but it's handled by the browser. That's the only one I would recommend if you use alerts. And again, this is called the JavaScript alert message box. Any other questions? Jim, okay, how do you manage things like forms with branching logic where different questions are required based on earlier decisions? You would create a multi-page form for that. So a multi-page form where after you branch, you go to another screen, right? That's how you would do it. Create after you branch, go to another screen. This could be a new step. We've done that actually using Salesforce flows components. Great questions. Did we answer all your questions?
We have one last one.
Is it true that required form fields should not only be identified using an asterisk, but by a text description as well? In my example, as you can see, I have a sentence on the top saying fields marked with a red asterisk are required. That will be sufficient with the red asterisk. I also showed in line that each field has aria required equals true. And that gives that lets the screen reader user know that this field is required, and it will announce the field as required. I hope that answers your question. You can, however, use the word required on each element that's required. A better technique on this example form would be that you use the word optional for middle initial and street address to, and then have a sentence on the top saying all fields are required unless noted as optional. And then you could put in parentheses here, middle initial optional, street address to optional, because all other fields are required. That's another technique. And again, on these fields, you would just have to use aria required equals true. And this sentence would change to all fields are required unless marked as optional. So there's multiple techniques. I'm just using one of many. Thank you so much for everybody for joining us today. This was great turnout, and I hope you all learned some. Take the resources and read up on mass.gov where I have the code pen embedded. I also have a Word document that you can download with developer line by line, breaking down the code for developers. And thank you for joining our session. Thank you so much. And fill out the feedback form as Ashley just shared here. Thank you so much.